Welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. It's Carey Newhoff here, and every week we try to bring you some relevant conversations to navigate through crisis. So really thankful to have Rick Warren back with us. And if you missed part one of the interview, you might want to go back and listen to it. Talked about all kinds of things, but this time in the interview, it's going to get a little more serious. As a lot of you would know, Rick lost a son to suicide. And so we talk about that, and we talk about the mental health toll of the pandemic on leaders and on families and on people. And I want to give you, first of all, a heads up. And secondly, we know, because we've been tracking with you for a year, how hard this has been on you. And if you're a leader who struggles with suicidal thoughts, who maybe is wondering if you're depressed or just really struggling, I would encourage you to talk to somebody, to reach out for help, whether that's a counselor, a medical doctor, at a bare minimum, a good friend that you can talk about what you're going through with. I think you're going to find this conversation helpful, but I promise you, it is no substitute. A podcast can't be a substitute for a friend and for medical care and for getting help with that. But I'm really grateful to Rick. Both he and Kay have talked very openly in the hopes that this will help with other people who are going through similar things as well. There's also a very graphic description of what happened with Matthew as well. So if you're listening with young ears or that sort of thing, I just want to give you a heads up on all that. And I'm really grateful we get to have conversations like this, because this is real life and it's a super challenging time. Also, just so you know, Barna continues to partner with you in the day-to-day logistics of leading a church as well. And they're starting a brand new hybrid church collab. And if you want to learn more, this is a cohort that you can sort of learn, digital and physical church with. I would encourage you to head on over to barna.com/collab. That's just COLAB. And you can use the promo code ChurchPulse15. You'll get a discount there, because we're committed to navigating both the personal but also some of the vocational challenges that we have in ministry. So with all that said, we talked a lot of stuff, talked about a lot of things in part one, but now we dive into a more serious and I think very needed conversation. So here's part two of David Kinnaman and my conversation with Rick Warren. You said when we started this, just as a joke before we started recording, that this has been, like a lot of people, busiest year of your life, busiest year of your ministry. And I can see why. You've been really personally engaged when you do that much work.
Yeah.
Personally engaging people, and 17 hours of Zoom on racial justice alone, et cetera. How has the pandemic impacted you personally?
Well, as I said, my schedule has been much more difficult because you're holding together a church without corporate gatherings. But part of it is being purpose-driven means we have 5 purposes, not 1. And I understand why a lot of guys are anxious to get back, because if all you've got is a worship service and you take that away, you're up a creek without a paddle. But we don't have 1 purpose. We have 5. We have worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and evangelism. And although the public worship was shut down, we've been going great guns on the other 4. We've done more ministry, more discipleship, more fellowship, albeit online, these, and more evangelism. And so when you're purpose-driven and you balance all 5, you could lose a purpose for a period of time, and it doesn't cut you down. If you're a 1-purpose church, we have a worship service. Well, then yes, of course, you're going to want to get back to that worship service as soon as possible. Our budget our giving was above budget this year, and we never took an offering. Why? Well, we had already had like 50, 60, I think 67% were already given online. And so this is stuff that you have to, I can show a church, I can show anybody how to build a church to go through a crisis, but I can't show them how to do it fast. It took me 40 years. Okay. It's like the stuff that we're doing, I'm going, it's like pie in the sky to most pastors, because they go, well, how'd you get there? Well, it took me 40 years of loving them and sacrificing for them and being there. When you have integrity, it gets better every year. When you don't, it gets worse every year. and then you eventually have to leave. But for me personally, my biggest concern has been maintaining the emotional health of me and my staff. And so while I'm last May, while I was going through James, I did a message. There's a verse in Romans that says, keep yourself fueled in a flame. Okay. Don't give up. It's in the Message paraphrase, but don't burn out. Keep yourself fueled in a flame. Don't quit in hard times, but pray all the more. And I said, how do you keep yourself fueled in a flame? Here's the problem with pastors who are listening. You are being drained emotionally every day that this crisis continues. If you've got a battery and you got one light bulb and you attach it to it, it'll last a long time. If you attach two batteries, it'll burn out in half the time. If you attach four batteries, two light bulbs. If you attach four light bulbs to the battery, it's going to burn out in a quarter of the time. Pastors don't have one light bulb. They got multiple light bulbs, so they're burning out. And I will say this to those who are listening. Some of you came into this pandemic with a full tank. And if you can work at home and you can broadcast your service online and you can do online from home, you're probably doing okay. You're obviously tired, but you're probably doing okay. Some pastors came into this thing already half empty in their tank. Yeah. And they're running on empty now. And then there are other people who came into this last year with nothing in their tank. They were already drained. Those are the people I care about most. And those are the people I've spent most of my time with this year. I'm either working with our church or coaching and counseling pastors who are struggling with burnout. I did a message I called them the 10 COVID commandments. And it's basically 10 things to do to keep yourself emotionally refreshed and restored and recharged. I do them all myself. I've probably taught that message a dozen times. I taught it to a Lutheran group this last week. I taught it to Vineyard pastors the week before. I taught it to a group of pastors in the Philippines the same week. And because that's what everybody's needing. They're all needing, how do I keep my reserves? You know, people say, well, we're all in the same boat. We aren't. We're all in the same storm, but we're not on the same boat. Some people are going through this crisis in a yacht. Okay. And if you got a nice home and you can work from home and your job isn't threatened, you're okay. Some people going through it in a rowboat. They lost their job and they don't have any paddles. And some people, they're just holding on to a piece of driftwood. How do you shelter at home when you're homeless? You know, those are people we have to care about. One of the important things I would say right off the bat to pastors is this: show yourself and others grace. Okay. Show grace to yourself and others. In other words, you need to start treating yourself the way God does. You know, God treats you graciously. He treats you with mercy. If you get up in the morning and you've had a good night's sleep and an hour or two are into the day, you're going, man, I'm exhausted. Welcome to the human race. Yeah. Okay. Everybody's exhausted because change drains. And so just humbly admit, God, I need your help. And one of the things that I'm trying to teach pastors how to do is to set and stick with a simple routine. Very important when you're going through times where everything is changing. Routine develops resilience. Routine develops resilience. Predictability creates stability. All right. In other words, structure creates steadiness. And so what you need to do is set amount of work that's reasonable for you. No pastor should think that he or she could operate at the same level they were a year and a half ago. Okay, they just can't. That is stupid to even think so. You're not Superman. You're not Superwoman. And so you don't have 100% that you had a year and a half ago. And it'll come back, but right now, you give the Lord 100% of what you got. That's what Lord, this is what I got. And so it's when you're stuck at home, it's easy to slip into a sloppy routine, thoughtlessly stay up later than you should and sleep in and develop bad habits. And this is where you got to set and stick with a simple routine. And one of the keys that I teach guys is the principle of dosing and spacing. And what that is if you go to a doctor and you're sick and they give you medicine, you don't go home and swallow the whole bottle itself. You spread it out. You take those meds over time. You space them and you're dosing for maximum health. And I've taught a lot of pastors this last year to do that. I say, if you get up in the morning, you go for a 45-minute walk, that's good. Okay, that's good. But if you then sit down and spend 8 hours in front of your screen, you just wasted the emotional. Physically, maybe you got some benefit, but the emotional part's gone. It would actually be better for you to get up and take 5-minute breaks and walk around your neighborhood 4 or 5 times a day if you're at home, rather than doing them all at once. Don't do it all at once. Spread it out through the day. You go work about an hour and a half, then take a break. Work an hour and a half, take a break. And this is called dosing and spacing. It's really some of the latest in neuroscience and things like that work. So I've got a staff member who told me that day, Brandon told me, he said, I'm doing a virtual commute. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm working at home, and in order to put a bifurcation between my work life and my home life, when I finish my work for the day, I go outside and I walk for 15 minutes around my neighborhood. And I listen to a podcast, probably yours, listen to a podcast, or just process the day. And then when I come home, I go inside. I've made a clear delineation between work life and home life. And that's an important thing.
That is really important. David, do you have a question that you wanted to ask Rick?
Yeah, this is such a personal topic. Rick, you might know my dad led a church for many years in the Phoenix area.
Yeah.
One of my heroes as a leader. And so as we talk
about great man.
Yeah, Gary Kinnaman. And so the sustainability of leaders is something that I think I've been really concerned about for many years. Did a big study called State of Pastors. In our current study, just up to the minute, January 22nd through 27th, we asked a sample of pastors, have you given real serious consideration to quitting being in full-time ministry within the last year? And 29%, 3 in every 10 Protestant pastors. Some estimates have been a lot higher than that. I think they were a little overstated, but this is our most current, I think, a pretty accurate read of that.
Yeah.
And so we've just been talking a lot about how, you're coaching into pastors to help them be more resilient. What do you think are some of the opportunities for pastoral leadership coming out of this crisis? Like, what will pastoring look like? How will we make sure we don't lose men and women who are considering quitting?
Right.
And how do we find the kind of vision for pastoring in the future when the church looks so different than what we might have imagined signing up for?
Yeah, it is going to look different. We're in a major epoch, an epic shift. But here's the thing. I've never been much of a futurist because I don't know what the future is going to hold. We can make educated guesses. So what I encourage pastors to do is look at what's not going to change. Okay. While other things are going to change, what's not going to change? Well, for instance, we know people are going to have the same problems. They're going to still get lonely. They're going to still feel guilty. They're going to have shame. They're going to worry. There's going to be anxiety. There's going to be fear. There's a lot of things we know about the future that's not going to change. Human nature is not going to change. But also, what's not going to change is your opportunity to have a deep relationship with Christ, so that no matter what goes on, you are building on the rock, not on sand. And what I discovered is a lot of these pastors, and I agree with you, if it's 3 out of 10 that are ready to quit, it's 9 out of 10 that are tired.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 out of 10. Okay. I don't know any pastor goes, oh, I'm not tired. Okay. Every pastor I know is tired. I have the philosophy, and I think you can see this in the ministry of Paul, opportunity plus obstacle equals God's will. Okay. Or even opportunity plus opposition equals God's will. I've done nothing in 41 years at Saddleback that wasn't hard. Everything is hard. Okay. Nothing's easy. But it is to just keep on keeping on at whatever pace you are. And one of the verses God gave me early on, in the first year of the church, I didn't know how to pace myself. And when I started it, I was working 18 hours a day, and the office was in my home, and I was loving it. And the church grew from me to, I don't know, about 150 people the first year, and 60, I baptized 60, and I was so excited. And on the last Sunday of the year, 1980, I stood up to speak and fainted. Just boom, fell over. And it was from sheer workaholism and exhaustion. And what happened after that, which was worse, is I developed a phobia that if I speak again, I will faint again. And for the next month, I took a month off, January of 81, and I went to the desert. I took Kay and my kids to Phoenix, where her parents lived, and I went out to the desert and had a desert experience. And out there, there were a couple haunting fears going on. One of them was, God, I don't deserve this. You're blessing me too much. For me, I grew up in little tiny churches, and to have 150 people in church was just overwhelming to me. It was overwhelming. And I said, I have enough time being consistent, hard enough time being consistent in quiet time, much less being a pastor. I know who I am, and you're blessing me more than I deserve. The second thing was, I can't handle it. It's growing too fast. If it keeps growing at this pace, we'll be having several thousand people in a few years. Little did I know. And out there in the desert, God said three things to me. He said, number one, you're right, Rick, you don't deserve it. But it's all grace. It's all God's grace. I'm a trophy of grace. Grace is the fact that God knows every stupid mistake I'm going to make in ministry, and he chose me. Grace is the fact that God knows every dumb thing you're going to do in your ministry, pastor, and God chose you. You have not called me. I have called you and ordained you that you would go and bear forth fruit. You were chosen by God. And if you're chosen, and he says, I put you into the ministry, you got to stay put until God chooses to do something else. So it's not a volunteer thing. It's you're put in the ministry. And it's ministry is received, not achieved. You don't earn it. It's something you just relax in the grace of God. So he said, you're right. You don't deserve it. But nothing. I don't deserve to be saved, much less in the ministry. So everything God does in my life is by grace through faith. I put my faith in God's grace. The second thing the Lord said, and this goes back to Dave's question about how do you last in the ministry, is Jesus said, by the way, Rick, whose church is it? And I said, well, Lord, it's your church. Obviously, you said, I will build my church. He said, good answer. And I just imagined me getting up out of my chair in the pastoral office and saying, okay, Jesus, sit down. You're now the pastor of the church. It's not my church. And what that meant to me was, ultimately, it wasn't up to my creativity, my ingenuity, my hard work, my whatever, talent or whatever, to make this thing run. It was Jesus' church. And he would grow it at the rate and space that he wanted to. It wasn't my job. Out of those two convictions, that everything God does in my life is by grace, I never will deserve it. And number two, that ultimately he's responsible, not me, came the conviction that I am God's man with God's message for this church, and nothing can shake that from me. No criticism, and I have been criticized for 40 years. No misunderstanding, no health problem, and I've had those, no pandemic, because my hope is not built on those things. And We look not at the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen, because the things that are seen are temporary, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And so it all has to do with focus in keeping on. If you were to come into my office, you would see on the wall there is a little carved out piece of stone, and it says in Hebrew, people always want to know what it says. It says, "This too shall pass." This too shall pass. And so when COVID came along as the most recent crisis, and then these other storms came in with them, this too shall pass. And so what I do, hang on. And to those pastors who are discouraged right now, what do you do when you're going through hell? You keep walking. Okay. You don't sit down. I don't want to stay in hell. When you're going through hell, you just keep walking. And you put one foot in front of the other. Sometimes getting up and putting one in front of the other is a successful day for a pastor.
I'd love to, such a helpful picture of those early days of your ministry and how the voice of the Lord in your life has kept you going for so many years. I'd love to sort of zoom in on maybe one of those crises or one of those periods of time for you when you felt, like the wind was getting beat out of you. And as I mentioned it before we started recording, my wife died October 28th. So leading through loss, I took 3 months off for bereavement. I'm still like only partway back. I'm not fully back, but talk to us about what you've learned in light of those things that the Lord said to you at the very beginning of your ministry.
Yeah.
And then you go through a period and criticism and loss, and you and Kay have experienced tremendous loss. How do I keep going? What do I do? And to all of us as leaders who are going through a year of so much loss, how do we keep our North Star?
Like I said, we're going to go through a tsunami of grief, because a lot of people who will never get COVID have still lost a lot. They missed the prom. They missed their graduation. They missed the birth of their first grandchild. They couldn't go to their daddy's funeral. There's so many things that people have lost that when it finally catches on and people finally get that and they realize what they've lost, there is going to be a lot of grief. And that's why I actually believe that grief is going to be a front door for evangelism in the next years, because so many people are dealing with this. Let me just give you, if a pastor's happen to be taking notes, some off the top of my head thoughts on grief. Grief is individual, and what that means is everybody grieves differently. So there's no one way to grieve. Just know that there's no one right way to grieve. Grief takes time. I like to say there's no expiration date on grief. If I were to lose this arm, Dave, I'm going to notice it's gone for the rest of my life. It'll be easier to deal with, yes, but I will know that's gone. You losing a wife, you losing a son, according to the Holmes stress scale, it's a scale of 1 to 100 on the most stressful things in life. 100 at the top, the most stressful thing is the loss of a spouse or a child. More than being on the front line of a battle in the army or anything else. So you're at the top, 100 on that. Grief takes time. You can't rush it. Nobody can tell you. People will say at some point, and they mean well, but are you over it? You never get over it. Grief is not something you get over. It's something you get through. Okay. And what I have learned about grief is that it's a good thing. Grief is actually a gift. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." I can't receive comfort if I stuff my grief. I can only receive comfort if I feel my grief. Grief is a gift from God. It's how we get through the transitions of life. There is no success without growth. There is no growth without change. There is no change without loss. And there is no loss without pain. So a pastor who wants his church to grow without going through loss and pain is like a woman saying, I want to have a baby, but I don't want to go through labor and delivery. It isn't going to happen. Now, here's a very important thing in dealing with people in pain. The deeper the pain, the fewer words you use. Every pastor needs to write this down. The deeper the pain, the fewer words you use. If you are talking to somebody who had a bad hair day, you can talk to them for 30 minutes. But if they just lost a wife or a son, you show up and you shut up. There's nothing you can say that will help. They don't need your words. They need you. It's the ministry of presence. Pastors and people always go, I didn't call them because I didn't know what to say. Don't say anything. Show up and shut up. It's the ministry of presence. Just be there. When Matthew died, the night before he died, he had come over to our house, and he had we'd eaten dinner together, watched TV, played a couple games, and as he was leaving, he goes, Dad, I'm just so tired. He had struggled with mental illness since a baby. He'd struggled with clinical depression since a young child, and had been through, when he was 17 years old, he came to me in tears one day and said, Dad, it's real obvious I'm not going to be healed. We've been to the best doctors. I've had the best therapists, the best counselors, the best prayer warriors praying for me. Dad, you're a man of faith. Mom is a woman of faith. It's real obvious I'm not going to be healed. Why can't I just go to heaven right now? That'll break your heart as a dad, to have your son say those kind of words to you. And me in tears, sobbing back, said, Matthew, I don't think you really want to die. I just think you want to ease the pain. But I do believe this. My prayer is twofold. One, either you'll have a miracle and you will miraculously be cured of your mental illness. I don't care if it's by medicine or miracle. Doesn't matter to me. If God wants to use therapy and medicine, fine. I just want you to be healed. But I said, Matthew, the truth is, this is not heaven. This is earth. And everything on earth is broken, and not everybody gets healed. And not every problem goes away, and not everything has a happy ending. Everything is broken on this planet. So what do you do with the problem that can't be solved? You have to manage it. You have to learn how to manage it. And my prayer is that with your good Christian faith, you're a strong believer, with help from Christian doctors or psychiatrists, medicine, therapy, your own growth, support group of others, that you will be able to manage this pain and help others in the future, if that's what it is. Because some things just don't go away in life. This is not heaven. That's why we pray, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Because in heaven, it's done perfectly, completely, instantly, all the time. It's not, that's rare here on earth. A lot of things happen. If I got drunk and drove into a woman and killed her and her baby, that's not God's will. That's my will. Sin is not the will of God. Sorry, it's just not. And I'm not going to attribute sin to God. So anyway, he made it 10 more years. He was very courageous. But that night he went home, and when we didn't hear from him for 24 hours. And so Kay and I began to be worried, because that was very rare. We drove over to his house. His car was in the driveway. The door was locked. We didn't have a key to his house. And we're standing there fearing that what we'd feared might happen someday, and what we'd prayed would never happen someday. And we called the police to come and break down the door. And we're standing there sobbing, holding each other, my wife and I, sobbing. And Kay was wearing a necklace that had 2 words on it that was the title of her most recent book at the time. And it said, choose joy. And I said, how do you choose joy when your heart is breaking in 1,000 pieces? How do you choose joy when your heart's breaking in 1,000 pieces? Well, the police came, broke it down, found out that he had shot himself. It was a mess. We couldn't even go in to see it. Within about 15 minutes, my small group was there. I don't just believe in small groups. I'm in a part. The group I'm in, I've been in 18 years. My group showed up on those doorsteps. There was nothing they could say that was going to encourage me. what they did was hug me. The guys got around and hugged me, and the girls got around and hugged Kay. And then they said, we're not going home tonight. We're staying at your place. You don't have to do anything. They slept in the kitchen and on the sofa. They said, we're just going to be here with you. That's the power of koinonia. That's the power of community. I received, this is no exaggeration, because I'm pretty well known. I received maybe 35,000 letters and cards of condolences. And it was a brutal time. I mean, to walk through an airport and see my son's name on the CNN ticker with the word suicide is gut-wrenching. It's just gut-wrenching. The cards that meant the most to me were not from rock stars and presidents and prime ministers. I got those, but they were primarily, the ones that meant the most to me were from people that Matthew had led to Christ, that had been depressed themselves. Matthew would go on these suicide websites and talk people out of suicide. And he would say to me, Dad, I know the truth. I can't get it to work for me. I have this claw in my brain and I'm in pain all the time. And I had people write me, said, I know Matthew's in heaven and I know he struggled with mental illness, but he led me to faith. And I'm going to be in heaven one day with him. And I remember writing in my journal, and I would encourage anybody, and I would encourage you, David, to keep a journal, because you'll forget what you felt. You'll forget. Write it down, and it'll be really important later. I wrote, in God's garden of grace, even broken trees bear fruit. And then I wrote, and we're all broken. Because we're all broken in mind and in body and in spirit. None of us are perfect. God only uses broken things. If he used perfect things, nothing would get done, because there aren't any. So in grief, one of the important things in grief is to really realize that feelings are meant to be felt. Sounds pretty simple, but it's a very important, profound truth. Feelings are meant to be felt, not to be stuffed. And don't try to get over it. You don't get over it. You get through it. You don't get over it. You get through it. The deeper the pain, the fewer words you use, but what you do is you feel the feelings. You don't repress them. You don't suppress them. You confess them. You express them to God. When I see so many particular men, we're not good at grief. And we're just not good at it. I'm not good at it. And I had to learn to express it, to express feelings. If you don't, it's like shaking up a can of Coke and putting it in the freezer. It's going to explode at some point. And it's going to come out sideways. And this is where you see guys having affairs, or getting into porn, gambling, or all kinds of bizarre behavior, because they never dealt with something they were grieving. They never really dealt with it. The only illegitimate feeling, every feeling is legitimate. The only illegitimate feeling is second guessing yourself. If only I'd done this, how would it be different? If only I'd done that, it would be different. That is useless and it's worthless. The only reason we have emotions is because God is an emotional God and we're made in his image. The Bible says God gets jealous. God gets angry. God gets frustrated. God laughs. God cries. God weeps. God grieves. The only reason worms don't have emotions, okay? They don't have, and cows don't pray. Cows don't love. Okay, what makes us different is we're made in the image of God, and God is an emotional God. So every emotion is legitimate. And here's the thing, is just to realize it doesn't last. Now, I grieve over your loss of your wife. I will tell you this, that when I lost my son, Kay and I made a decision that we weren't going to try to talk each other out of our pain, that we weren't going to try to cheer each other up. And grief comes in waves like this. And 1 minute you go, I can handle it. And the next minute you go, I can't handle it. And the next minute I can handle it. And then I can't. And you can go through that. You know this. You go through it 100 times in one day. You can go up in a minute. You can go through waves. But your wave never matches anybody else's. Okay? So like my wave doesn't match Kay's wave. And so what we did is, when in the years ahead, you will hear a song or smell something or taste something, and it's going to trigger a grief. Okay, it's just going to trigger. Please let that grief out. Pause and grieve. Okay, don't stuff it. Just go, yeah, I am sad. I'm sad. It's okay to tear up. Tears are not a sign of weakness. They're a sign of love. They're a sign of love. And so Kay and I are actually closer today because we made this decision that when one of us is grieving, the other person walks over, and instead of trying to cheer them up or talk to them, talk them out of their grief, we just put an arm around them and share the grief. Okay, pat on the back, a handshake. The point I want to make there is that we are responsible to people, but we're not responsible for them. And so we can't second guess what they do or what we do, but we can just be there. It's the ministry of presence. You know, it's show up and shut up. And so, and you're going to have to, Dave, one of the parts of forgiveness, parts of grief is you're going to have to forgive people who say the wrong thing. Some of the people who meant the most sincere thing said the most hurtful things to me. Okay. And, you know, people say, well, at least you got other kids. I don't want my other kids. Okay. It's like, well, at least you're young. You could marry again. Come on. I had the love of my life, you know, that people, and you have to forgive them because bitterness is a sin. Grief is not. Grief's a good thing, but resentment will kill you. Pretty much for 16 weeks, all I did is be alone with God or with Kay, and that was it. I didn't really do anything. Because shock was not a matter of weeks for me. It was months and months and months I was in shock. And I still am grieving today. But when I came back, I decided I was going to do like C.S. Lewis did. You know, he wrote that book, A Grief Observed, when Joy, his wife, died. And I thought, I'm going to out of body kind of examine how I'm handling this. And we all know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of death and dying, but I think she missed a couple. And I came back and I did a series called How to Get Through What You're Going Through. And each week I took one of the phases. They're not even really phases because they can be out of order.
Right.
But the first one is shock. Okay. The second one is sorrow. And that's just deep, deep sadness that you feel. And you move from shock to sorrow, and then you move to struggle. And the struggle, part of grief, is where we ask the why questions. Why did it happen? Why now? Why her? Why this time? Why, God, why? Now, it's okay to ask why. Even Jesus did on the cross. My God, why? So if it's okay for Jesus to ask on the cross, why have you forsaken me? It's okay for me to ask that. Okay. But the real issue, the test is, what are you going to do when you don't get an answer? Because you're not going to get an answer. Me trying to understand why everything happens in the world would be like an ant trying to understand the internet. Okay. My brain capacity isn't big enough. If I could understand God, then I'd be God. So it's okay to ask why. It really is. Just when you have to say, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. That in spite of my not getting it, I remember writing in my journal, I'd rather walk with God and not have my questions answered than have all my questions answered and not walk with God.
Mm.
You see, a lot of us we think, and the biggest mistake people make in grief is they think that if they had an explanation, it would make it less painful. Explanations never comfort. It is what they need is the presence of God. Not if my wife, Kay, if Kay were to drop dead tonight and I knew the reason, it wouldn't make it any less painful. Okay, it'd still be excruciatingly painful, even if I knew the reason why. So we think that that's going to make it better, but it doesn't. So we go from shock to sorrow to struggle. And then when we finally give up on that and go, well, I'm not going to get the answers, we go to surrender. And in surrender, you just go, okay, Lord, I just need your presence. I just need you. I don't need your explanation. I just need comfort. I'm hurting. I'm in pain. And we go to surrender. When we get to the point of surrender, it takes us to the next stage, which is sanctification. And that's when God starts working in my character. I'm not the same person I was 7 years ago. Okay, I still, unfortunately, I still have the same personality quirks, but I'm not the same person I was, because it transforms you. Grief transforms you. And one thing, it sensitizes you to everybody else.
For sure.
In pain.
Yeah.
You've known that, I'm sure, already. It makes you sensitive. So that's the sanctification. And then finally, you get to the last stage, which is service, which is 2 Corinthians 1. God comforts us in our pain so that we can comfort others with the comfort we've been given. That your greatest ministry will come out of your deepest pain. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Your greatest I've talked to 2 dads of suicide today already. Okay. And there's not a day goes by or a week goes by. And some days I don't get it, but congressmen will call and all, you name it. And you will find that God will give you, people will know, oh, he's safe. He's lost a loved one. He knows how to deal with it. And so, some of the things that I've just shared on this, maybe you can pass them on, because nobody trains us.
Nope.
We all know we're going to have loss, but nobody trains us.
Yeah.
Loss is inevitable. The one thing's for sure is death. So that's what I would say about that.
That was a real privilege,
Yeah.
just to hear and to see the 2 of you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm very sorry for your loss, Rick.
Thank you. By the way, that's what you need to tell people. And Carey, you need to teach pastors to do this. There's only one appropriate thing to say, because people don't know what to say. They'll see you in the grocery store, and the only appropriate thing to say is, I'm sorry for your loss. Or even more, in my case, Matthew had a brother and sister. I'm sorry your family's loss. Okay, I'm sorry for your family's loss. And people say, well, I haven't seen him in 6 months. Fine, start with that. Because you can I can guarantee you 6 months from today, David's still going to be missing his wife. And if I hadn't seen him and I knew, the first thing I would have said to him is, David, I'm so sorry for your family's loss. Okay, I'm so sorry. Then we can talk about it. What you don't want to ask is, how are you doing? You don't want to know. Don't ask me that question, because I may be having a tough day that time. So don't ask me a question you don't want me to answer.
I wish somebody had told me early on, Rick, in my ministry, shut up and show up. That is the best pastoral advice.
Yeah.
I think there is. So
why, I wish I could start ministry over now with what I know now.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
Don't we all?
Just want to say again, Rick, thanks to you for joining us today, and for your openness. You just have such a great, honest, sort of forthright, just clear thinking way. I know you've taken a lot of hits through the years, sometimes for that openness, but I've always appreciated just learning from you and sharing today. We're just such an interesting sort of crux as a church, sort of like a pivotal moment for the church. And so I'm so excited about what the Lord is up to, about how he's deepening our faith in him.
Amen.
I certainly think that as we're leading through loss, as I'm leading through loss, that he's making our roots go down deeper into him, not just so that we can have a bigger ministry or do more in the world, but so that we have greater intimacy with Jesus.
Right.
And I see that in your life, just the way you talk about scripture, the way you talk about your love for the Lord.
Yeah.
And I just want to honor you today.
Thank you. Well, I do love Jesus. If he didn't do anything else for me, I owe him the rest of my life. People say, why do you do what you do? I love Jesus Christ. I love Jesus Christ.
Rick, I can't thank you enough for sharing so personally. And that was a really holy moment. And again, very sorry for your loss, and very grateful for you and for your legacy of leadership. Thank you so much for being with us this week. Really thankful that Rick was willing to talk about that. And as you know, this has been a really, really tough time for leaders. David and I, we talk about that a lot. We feel that very close to our hearts. And I promise you that is an even more powerful conversation, important conversation than just, what are you doing this Sunday? Or what are you thinking about the next 6 months? So if you find yourself in a place where you're discouraged, where you're depressed, where you are having suicidal thoughts, and I have been there as a leader a number of years ago, but man, I know that's a very dark place, and a podcast isn't going to be able to solve that for you. So I'd encourage you, go and seek medical help, professional help, go see a counselor, and talk to a friend, like reach out, break the silence. I know there's stigma. I know there's shame associated with it. I've been there, but one of the best things I did when I was really struggling in a dark place in my life 15 years ago was reach out to friends, reach out to counselors. And by the grace of God, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I remember a day where I was just probably at my lowest point. And I had a friend from our church call me and he said, Carey, I know you can't feel it today, but the sun will rise again. And you know what it did? I couldn't have imagined that it would, be a day where you could actually feel joy again. But that did come in my life, and I'm very grateful for it. So I just want you to know we're with you. Please reach out to someone nearby. And we are going to bring you the personal issues. We're also going to bring you the professional issues that we're all dealing with and the ministry issues. And if you are looking at hybrid church, make sure you check out Barna's Collab. You can go to barna.com/collab. There's one on how to lead a digital and physical church. I think hybrid ministry is the future. And we're committed to bringing more conversations like this to you in the future. If you're a new podcast listener, please subscribe.